So hello, everybody. Welcome to the BioRAFT EHS Community Connection webinar series. Today, we are going to be talking about reducing hazardous waste costs. This is a place where we've heard a lot of feedback from you, our scientific health and safety community, that your waste programs are difficult to sometimes keep costs down on. There's a lot of complexity there, a lot of feelings of worry that you'll overstep and then actually end up incurring more costs. So how do you find those places in those little, either big areas for savings or maybe a collection of small ones to improve the money that you'll be saving? So we're going to be talking about that today with our panelists, Jason Williams and Mike Williams, no relation. And we can go ahead and get started. So if the two of you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction about yourselves, where you work, background, and then we can kick off into our questions. So Jason, would you mind going first?
Yeah, so Jason Williams, chemical hygiene officer at Amherst College. I used to be a lab packer. In fact, I've been doing chemical safety stuff since freshman year of college. And then a lab pack company recruited me. So that was my first real job after college, was lab packing. Did that for a while. Then I worked as a university lab manager as well. So it's good to really be able to work with this stuff from all different angles as a lab packer, as a lab manager, and as a chemical hygiene officer. So yeah.
And Mike?
Sure, Mike Williams. A lot of people in my company and friends call me Willie. So if you know people in Triumvirate and you mentioned my name, they might say Willie. So just as an FYI. I've been with Triumvirate since I graduated college in 1999, so 22 years. Started off like Jason, I actually did lab packing, was in the field and did on-site support. And, moved into management. I did the scheduling coordination of the environmental specialists, chemists, and did that for about 4 or 5 years. I moved to Maryland from 2008 till 2019. I helped grow the business down there and helped manage customers and the business. So that was a lot of fun. Definitely a different world because I'm from Massachusetts. So it was good fun. And I moved back and now I'm doing sales. So I manage our sales development reps. They're the junior reps that maybe sometimes are calling you guys out there to get meetings and get a little bit of new business or help you guys solve some of your complex problems out there. But that's it in the whole. Been with Triumvirate pretty much my whole career from college. I had one small job, but it was for like maybe 2 months, so I don't even count it. And I actually, one thing I enjoy to do, I think I mentioned in the bio, is I coach my kids in sports around soccer, flag football, basketball. So lots of fun, and I enjoy that.
Probably a fair amount of chaos too.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we are going to get started here. Basing this first question off of what we were talking about earlier, a lot of the savings opportunities that it seems like are present for hazardous waste disposal programs happen in the pre-disposal, life cycle stages. So Jason, I guess I'll start off with you and then Mike ask you the same question. Could you share a few easy to implement pre-disposal strategies to reduce waste costs during those earlier life cycle stages?
Yeah, it really starts at the administrative level, I'd say. So if you're able to know what's going to come into your company or onto your campus, that's the place to start, because then you can stop in its track, or you can you'll be in a better place to advise your lab personnel. So if somebody were to buy 2 kilograms of sodium borohydride, you'd say, hey, you won't probably get through all of that, and that's a PG1. That's going to be really expensive. So maybe let's not buy 2 kilograms. You think you're saving because you're buying in bulk, but you really are not. The other thing maybe is to have a chemical share program that might help, so that people don't have to constantly buy the same chemical. So you can say, hey, if this person has it, maybe I can take 5 grams. I only need 5 grams, so that way the rest of it won't go as waste. Other things that you can do is just little things like having a really good relationship with your lab personnel. That helps, because then they'll readily ask you questions. A lot of times they do stuff because they don't know. So you have to be able to sit down and talk to them and explain certain things to them. why do we use certain types of waste containers? For example, why do we use a certain size of waste containers? Hey, because guess what? It doesn't, if you use a bigger one, it doesn't fit into a 5-gallon bucket, you know, and now they have to lab pack it in a 30-gallon bucket or 15-gallon bucket, and that's more expensive. So it's little things like that. So I'd say on the administrative level, you want to make sure that you know what's coming into your company or on your campus, and make sure that you are having really good conversations with the people you're regulating. In the more practical sense, I always tell people to, when you get your bills, look through them. You know, you kind of understand how it works. So look through your bills. If a 5-gallon bucket costs, I don't know, $150 and a 15-gallon costs $300, try to make sure that you keep it down to the 5-gallon, you know, so you can kind of really understand what's going on with your bills. Also understanding SDSs, that really helps, I've realized, you know, so go to section 14, see how stuff is transported, see how stuff is segregated, you know, see the difference between what's a PG1 and what's a PG2 and understand all the implications of that. You know, talk to your lab packers and kind of see how they do things. So, because one thing I always do when lab packers are here, I kind of follow them around a little bit, not creepily. I kind of follow them around a little bit and I kind of make sure that I want to see how they do things, how they operate, and see where I can do things to save some money. So maybe I can do this or I can do that. So yeah, from the predisposal point of view, there are lots of different things like that you could do.
And Mike, any easy to implement predisposal strategies that can really help save some costs?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, along with what Jason said, the inventory when you're first buying the product, that's obviously the most important. You know, just because you're, you know, if it's a lot cheaper to buy in bulk quantity, that doesn't mean you buy in bulk quantity if you're not going to use it. So I know that I've worked with a few universities and then we get into the pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals. They plan out their research or their experiment, and they have to actually give a written plan to an approver like Jason or like the folks out there, and they have to walk through it and say, what are you going to use, how are you going to use it, and walk you through that, and then what are you going to produce for waste at the end. And that kind of gives you an idea of what they're going to create, and you can figure out what the cost is on that, right? And I think, you know, sharing the cost back with them to say, well, this is what it's going to cost, you know. And I know there's different cost centers in a university and in companies, but you can relay that cost back to them and say, you know, is it worth it? What are you going to get out of this research, right? Oh, we're just doing it for fun, or I'm just trying to see what happens, right? Versus, you know, I'm trying to solve, I'm trying to find out the sequence for cancer or whatever it might be, right? It's you got to hold them accountable to it and find out what they're doing. I think that I found that works out really well, but it's really hard to do because you got to get full involvement, full support from the managers all the way down to, you know, the people planning the experiments.
Yeah, if I can add something here. So I think somebody was doing an experiment recently and they were using a random concentration of cadmium. And I was like, can you use less of that so that we can be under the ppm threshold for the D7 code? You know,
That's a great point. Great point, because they don't know what the threshold is.
Exactly. So I was chromium, sorry, D7. Yeah, and it's like, hey, so if we use a little bit less of this, does that change your research? And it really didn't. They just wanted a tiny bit of chromium in there. So let's use a little bit less, and let's not trigger the I think it's ppm. I think it's 1 ppm or something for chromium. I can't remember. So yeah, and let's not trigger that code. So there you go.
Yeah, I think Mike, I think you mentioned this earlier in our sort of pre-conversation, but that, you know, hazardous waste disposal is really 1% of any, you know, sort of bench scientist's job, and they're not really thinking about that. But of course, the impact can be really large. So, you know, how do you come up with those heuristics and really memorable tricks where in a situation they don't know what they're doing, they can kind of remember, oh, I should talk to this person. I should maybe avoid mixing these things if I'm not certain. You know, I really should keep in mind that these things need to get disposed of, and they're going to have a big cost that is oftentimes pretty shielded from me.
Yeah, no, and Jason said it earlier too in a little conversation. It's that kind of empathetic, letting him know that I know this isn't your whole job, and he talks to him one-on-one. You know, that one-on-one trainings are honestly more impactful than those group trainings, right? The group trainings, most people are Probably like looking out my window over here, and you know, it's just not as impactful as you do that to check the box, but it's when you get in the lab and you see them doing something wrong, or you can talk to a smaller group and explain the impacts of everything they did, use the examples that Jason and I use, and those go a long way.
Yeah, a good example would be like, for example, organic chemists obviously like to dissolve their compounds in different organic chemicals. And sometimes it's random. Sometimes they just need something non-polar, or sometimes they just need something polar. And let's say you'd grab benzene, let's say. Of course, that carries the 18 code. So you're dealing with something else there. Sometimes you can just dissolve it in something less flammable and or less toxic as well. So talk to them. You know, when I go into their labs and I pick up the waste, I go through the sheet with them and kind of see and make sure that I know what procedures they're doing. So why did you have to use benzene? You know, could we have used acetonitrile, let's say? You know, because that would probably be cheaper.
So, you know, sort of in that vein, Mike, I was wondering from you if you could tell us how you would recommend that our audience strike the right balance between under and over classifying their waste, really trying to not go too far in one direction.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that, but I think, you know, I always go back to like, if you haven't done really an in-depth waste analysis of what is going on, and just in your accumulation area where all the stuff comes down to, you know, right there is where you can kind of start. It should end in the lab because you would work your way back, like what we've been talking about. But you got to know what is in that profile that I'm making, whether it's a lab pack, it's still a profile, the inventory sheet, right? And or the bulk. When you try and bulk, that saves money. So tweaking that profile to be more cost effective for, you know, us at Triumvirate and you as the vendor or whoever it might be. Could be Clean Harbors or Veolia, right? They need to say this profile meets the certain water spec, the certain metal spec, right? And when you go over these specs, the drum prices go up, or maybe it's not even on the profile, and then you guys get that wonderful off-spec charge, right? And that's the one that stings even more, right? So I think it's really understanding your profiles, what's going in, how do I separate out certain things from just that dump everything in the same drum. It doesn't really work that way. Work with your vendor, your hazardous waste vendor. If you don't understand it, or, you know, reach out to colleagues. You know, obviously I have my info here and Jason has his. You can bounce questions off us. So I think, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just always interesting when you have those moments of judgment and you have to be the one to ultimately decide and take responsibility on, you know, what's the right balance? What do I do to avoid overcommitting or undercommitting here, where I could cause some bigger problems?
And one more thing on the non-hazardous piece too. I think I like to touch on that. You know, when you know it, I mean, there's a lot of really hazardous, non-hazardous chemicals, if that makes sense to everyone, right? They're nasty. They're bad for you. It can hurt you. It can, you know, cause illness. But they're really non-hazardous. Don't put them into your drums that have hazardous chemicals in there, because it's a lot cheaper to get rid of the hazardous waste drum. And I think also, I think with the world changing out there too, I don't know if anyone has heard, but there's major like disruption in the market right now with respect to fuel blending facilities are getting overwhelmed. You can't even get loads into them. They're rejecting pretty much trucks all the time. And then the incineration market is now, it's flowing over to that, and that's getting kind of tapped out, and it's getting harder and harder to get waste in those facilities. Like they're backlogged 6-8 months right now. So it's kind of tough. So you have to be open to not your traditional disposal methods of, you know, you guys want to recycle, which obviously is the best. We all want to recycle, reuse, but don't think that, you know, there's other options out there besides stopping at incineration, right? Be open to it, because I think you'd be surprised that it is still earth friendly, it is still sustainable. So just be open to it. I would need examples to maybe talk through some of them, but I you know, off the top of my head, I don't have any.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that, you know, by the time we get to the end of the Q&A, if anybody has particular questions around that element of disposal that they want to pop into the Q&A, By all means, we've already got a couple of great questions there. So a big thank you to everybody who has participated. If you just click on that Q&A to chat bubble button, it'll open that up and you can respond to each other's questions and have some side conversation as well. So kind of building off of that, Jason, I was wondering if you could address this one first. Could you talk about any too close for comfort big mistakes that could lead to substantially increased costs when it comes to handling your hazardous waste?
Yeah, we've touched on a few already. One big one, and we kind of talked about it in a previous seminar, is with peroxide forming chemicals. So especially during the pandemic, you know, where a lot of people hasn't been doing research. For example, there have been a lot of peroxide formation happening. Here, I've definitely noticed here because a lot of teachers aren't in the labs teaching, so the chemical pretty much expired. And it's the same. I've actually gotten some chemicals from some companies that have had maybe more than 100 ppm of peroxides in it, believe it or not, brand new. And so you want to make sure that you're checking all your chemicals quite regularly to make sure that, you know, you don't get to that point where it would cost you a lot, because what is it, $1,500, Mike, to come in and use the robot to open one of those peroxide bottles?
It all depends, but yeah, 15 to 100, 2,000, 10,000.
Yeah.
We had some people talking about that high thousands, lower five-figure number, depending on the.
But if you treat it properly, it's only $100 to get rid of it.
Sure. And then, you know, and then you got stuff like I mentioned earlier, with the chromium, you have people who are just randomly dumping stuff into stuff, and that's literally how they see it. I'm dumping stuff into stuff without really paying attention to the hazards and to the potential waste codes that they're triggering as well. So you want to make sure that you talk to your, in my case, chemical hygiene officer or related in your company to make sure that you're not incurring more cost than you need to.
And Mike, anything from your perspective, any of those sort of small mistakes that can lead to a really big impact on your savings or costs?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably don't understand this, and I've been doing it for a long time, so it's a little bit easier for me, but understand, you know, and Jason was talking about earlier, I want to get around to all the facilities where I ship my waste to. So I want to understand what they're doing with it. I want to take pictures. I want to explain it to people. If you don't know how it's being treated, and every facility that you've shipped to has a different requirement. If you go to a Clean Harbors facility, or a Viola facility, or a Ross, or you know, you pick a Tredebi, right? They all have different restrictions in their facilities. We have them in our facilities in Triumvirate. Like, you can't send specific waste codes. It's specific concentrations. If you're over these concentrations, it gets kicked out of their facility and costs more money, right? So understanding that with your vendor, and they're not always gonna be upfront and tell you. I know we really try to be that way with our customers, but we're not perfect either. We have thousands of profiles and customers, and we're not gonna be able to get to everyone. But if you bring it up as part of your quarterly reviews or yearly reviews with your waste vendor, I think that's the time to understand it. Let them explain it to you. Like, why is this cost the way it does? Is there something I can do to lower it? Just ask good questions, and you can get good answers, you know, about what you can do. Because if you don't know, you can't lower your costs, because the industry is not getting cheaper. Like I kind of said, we're getting price increases everywhere. And I'm sure you guys are feeling it as well, because if we're getting them, you guys are getting them. But there's ways to do it by being more creative. You know, outthink, like we talked about, outthink the regulators. Well, outthink yourselves and position yourselves better to ship the waste into a facility so that it fits how they want it. If it fits how they want it, they can handle it easier and it's cheaper.
Yeah, and this is maybe a great chance to also reconnect with the people who are generating the waste. And we were talking a little bit about training and just trying to avoid some of these costly mistakes in the first place. People really connect a lot with money and money savings. That seems like a simple narrative that seems to resonate really deeply with people. And you can very easily make a story about how they're kind of a hero for helping you out, you know, by making these small changes, just giving you a call, asking questions. they can really make a big impact. And helping people feel good about that might be a good way to really get them on your side and avoid making some of these costly mistakes.
Yeah, and I think so. That's one reason why I talk about reviewing your bill, in my case, Triumvirate bill with your lab personnel. So I take my bill, for example, and I literally do this, and I'd go to somebody and be like, hey, so a bag of worm is $40, you know, and I'd say the lab packers are $65 an hour. There are 2 of them that came, and they spent 5 hours plus an hour and a half driving. That's over $1,000, and I really break it down like that, so they really see what's going on. And as I say, you see, you just gave me 5 mils of, you know, barium something. It's gonna go into a 5-gallon container, no matter what, because they don't know stuff like that, you know. It's gonna go into a 5-gallon container. There's not a smaller UN rated container out there that it will go into, and that will cost me $150. You know, so if you break it down, they'll really resonate with that, because then they'll see that their one thing with the price of the vermiculite, with the hours that are logged, their one thing just costs $1,000, but they may have paid $30 for it. So, you know, you break it down with them. Sorry, Matt, if I gave away some trade secrets with the.
No, it's good. No, you're right. That's what you need, that help. If your vendor's not helping you, you know, you might want to think twice about switching to someone else that's going to help you, because if you have to work with your hazardous waste vendor to lower your costs, you can't just do it on your own. If you try, you can do some on your own, but trust me, we're the ones that have been doing it for 50 years, right? So
yeah,
you
don't
need to help.
Have all of, you know, maybe there are vendors out there who are just trying to, you know, pull the hood over your eyes and like get away with as much as they can. But I think that, you know, finding a vendor that like is going to be there as a partner, and is going to be there to help you, help educate you, give you those really good information. I mean, that's going to be just an invaluable resource on top of what you're already getting from them. Like, it sounds like that's an experience that you've had a lot, just sort of with your own dealings. And what, 22 years you've been at Triumvirate?
Yes, 22 years, helping a lot of people.
Yeah, we're all in safety because like we like helping people. So in terms of saving money specifically for a subsection of hazardous waste, talking about chemical waste specifically, Mike, I was wondering if there were any areas within that you could share that come to mind for cost savings around, again, chemical waste.
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of keep beating on the same horse a little bit. You'll hear me as I really, you know, if you want to get one to do for me out of this, do an in-depth waste analysis. Take some samples of your bulk waste streams if you have them, right? And send it out for analytical. Yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit of money, but you're really going to know if that drum has all the waste codes that actually listen. I just can't tell you how many times I've seen metals on a waste stream that doesn't T-clip for metals. So, you know, it could be mercury, it could be lead, whichever ones you want to pick. It doesn't clip for it, and that's going to cost you more money. Or the pH, you know, if you're pouring multiple carboys into one drum, right? You'd be surprised. It's your flame corrosive waste stream, and the lab's labeling it corrosive. You pH each of them, half of them don't pH less than 2 or greater than the 12.5, right? And you can start separating those out. But if you can't take the lab's word for it, and then now you start tracking that backwards. You say, all right, I know where this came from. I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to coach them up. I'm going to teach them. I'm going to find out what they're putting in there. You know, why is it sometimes corrosive? Why is it sometimes not? And, you know, Jason sounds like he's really great at backing into that. And that's the way you're going to solve some of these problems and lower your costs, because the price of waste disposal is going up. It's not going down, right? So you got to find other ways to put it into different lower cost categories. And maybe at that same point, they're mixing multiple waste streams from the lab just as the dumping ground. It's the dumping container. No, please separate them out. Put your non-haz in one other one so I can make a non-haz drum. And then on the other end, you have your hazardous chemicals, and separate them out. And if they're not sure, I don't know if everyone was on, Jason and I were like, just make 30 containers. It's easier for me, and it may not be for you guys, because like I said, you have to manage your own thing. And if you need help, just reach out and to your vendor, to me, Jason. I'm sure we can give you some more advice, you know, what the specific examples are, but it's just easier when it's specific chemicals to deal with, because then let the experts mix them together, right? So you get the cheaper thing, but you want to know what's going on and how that affects the profile too. Because I'm not saying people would do this on purpose, because they don't really do it on purpose, but if you send you get some new people that are there packing your waste, and you say, just pour all this in the drum for me, they're just going to pour all in the drum.
They're not gonna ask.
So just remember that. So you got to have a little knowledge behind it. You got to teach yourself this stuff, and ask questions to the more experienced people in that company, because they can guide that through.
And I really appreciate the perspective as well in this reminder of, look at the costs outside of just what you're generating. Look at disposal costs and what's happening over at the higher level in terms of incineration and options there. I mean, you may end up saving money, but having your costs not change too much, and that's because otherwise you would have seen them skyrocket.
Right. I mean, there's even solvent recycling. I mean, you guys, if there's a specific solvent that you're using a lot of, you might be able to buy a solvent recycler, and the purity doesn't need to be like research grade for whatever they're doing in the lab. So it's an option. You should explore it, and it doesn't fit for everybody.
For example, Mike, depending on the state you're in, there are companies that will come take your gallons of paint for free. They'll come with they'll drop a pallet, you can fill it up, and they'll come take it for free. So there are lots of those programs out there that you can take advantage of. So look them up.
Yeah, you got to do your research. Call your local environmental reps and ask them what programs there are to help you reduce your waste. That they're there to help you. Remember that's why we pay them taxes. Both businesses and universities and us as taxpayers. So they're there to help. And I've always had great relationships with the regulatory people where I worked. I built them up with Maryland. I had them in Massachusetts before I left. And, being in the Northeast, I can be in like 8 states in like 2 hours. So you have to be knowledgeable in multiple states, which is a lot harder than maybe some of the bigger states like California, but California is a whole other animal with their regulations too.
Yeah. Great. So moving on here to our next question, Jason, I was wondering if you could talk about how you've used waste profiles to increase your savings and efficiency.
Wow. Yeah. So Mike touched on a lot of it before, but I'm a big proponent of waste profiles. So I guess we should back up and kind of explain what we're talking about here, I guess. So when I was a lab packer, and I'm sure Mike has the same thing, when I walked into a facility and I had to lab, let's say, a big university, and I had to do a 3-day lab pack, I was much less happy than if I walked into a facility and I had to just get their profile drums, right? Because there's a lot less work for me, and a lot less work for me means a lot less time, and a lot less time means a lot of savings for you. So what I do here, for example, is I have a profile for probably 90% of our waste. Or something like that. Obviously, there are some things you can't lab pack and you shouldn't lab pack because it would cost you more money. You shouldn't, because it would cost you more money, so you have to lab pack it. But in general, it's really good idea to call your waste company and say, hey, what things have all these different things? Can we make some waste streams? Can I put all of these things together in one drum? And the pluses here are, and I'll spell it out so that we're doing specific examples. So if I have 55 gallons of paint, 55 1-gallons of paint, if I pour those out, I can fit them into a 55-gallon drum, right? If they were to be lab packed, you wouldn't be able to put 55 of them in one drum, if that makes sense. So you're saving on pieces. And if you're saving on number of pieces, you're saving on money. So by me bulking, pouring out those individual 1-gallon paints into a bigger 55-gallon drum, it's saving us money, if that makes sense. Also, for example, if you were to lab pack a drum, you have to use vermiculite. When you bulk, you're not using vermiculite anymore. So that saves you, that will save you a little bit as well. Again, it's saving time because the chemist doesn't have to go for his drums, open them, segregate your stuff, look up the SDS, put all of them in there, close your drum, write up the manifest, because a lot of times when you're picking up profile drums, a lot of times you can pre-do your manifest as well, because you know exactly what you're about to pick up because it's predetermined. So that's the whole point. So it saves a lot of time. Maybe not, it might not save you a lot of time, but it saves the chemist a lot of time, which means it saves you a lot of money. So so that's one really huge point. Make sure that you bulk as many of your chemicals as possible. Also, by the way, as a former lab packer, I know that lab packers, because it's not our waste, we have to be a little more conservative. So if you see something, and Mike touched on this earlier, but if you see something that says hydrochloric acid, you're just gonna call it acid. You're not gonna, you know, you're gonna give it the D2 and you're gonna lab pack it. You probably won't even pH it. But me, when I'm doing that here, if I see something with hydrochloric acid, again, it doesn't mean that it's regulated, because it might be pH 7, you know. So there, then I don't have to call that hazardous waste, for example. Also, with profiles, because it's all about percentages and volumes and concentrations, maybe I can put a little bit of base in my acid drum, right? Or something like that, which a lab packer would never do. You know, you'd never see a lab packer pack an acid and a base together. But because of I know my waste better than everybody else. Maybe I can put, you know, because maybe it says NaOH, but maybe sodium hydroxide, but maybe the pH is only 8 or 9. Maybe I can put a little bit of that into my acid drum, and so I still only have one piece versus, you know, what would have been 2 pieces.
It's a great point, Jason. You know that it's non-hazardous, but you have the room left in the drum for the shipment, so you're like,
exactly,
it's going to cost me a lot less to leak that in there, and it's compatible, right? And that's a great point. And there's also, you know, everybody, I don't know if you've heard of loose packs and slam packs, whatever they're called. And it's a profiled waste. It's like a profiled lab pack.
Yeah.
So now you don't have to follow the lab pack guidelines with the 60-40 rule of the 60% firm or chemical 40% burn. So, so I was a little rusty on that one. But you don't have to follow that, so you can actually put more chemical in the 55-gallon drum or the 30-gallon drum, and it's legal.
The other thing too is that a lot of times, so when we bulk here, we use recertified drums. We don't use brand new drums. So so we either get it from a company that recertify our drums, or we reuse drums. It's hazardous waste, so you're able to do that. Obviously, as long as it's UN rated and in good condition, etc. If a lab packer is coming into pack, he's going to use brand new brand new drums, and they're going to obviously charge you for these drums, and you're going to pay a different price than you would have paid for a secondhand drum, for example. So that's you can save some money there too in that sense. So that's the good thing about profiling. You can use your own drums, and and one last thing before I forget as well, is that don't have to worry about container size in terms of when I bulk stuff. I am taking the stuff from the labs and then I bulk it into a bigger drum. When you lab pack stuff, if you have like 1 gallon of liquid in a 5-gallon container, right? And they're gonna lab pack that, that might not be able to fit in a 5-gallon container because it's a 5-gallon container. So they're gonna have to put it in a bigger container. And that's gonna, even though it's 1 gallon, it's gonna cost you a 15-gallon container. While it might actually cost me $0 because maybe I had space in my profile drum. So I hope that makes sense.
That made a lot of sense to me. But good analogy.
Yeah. Great. Well, a huge thank you also to everybody in our audience who's found their way over to the Q&A panel. There are already a lot of fantastic questions over there. And I think we're going to transition over to our live Q&A a little bit early here, just because there's, I think, going to be plenty to discuss with the time going. Yeah. So before we do transition over, Mike, Jason, are there any other sort of just final thoughts or questions or things that you'd like to mention before we sort of switch gears? Yeah.
I think, you know, having done this from all the different angles, if you're in a university, make sure that you are not just talking to the PIs, but you're also talking to the students, because a lot of times the students are the ones in the lab. So you can tell a PI something, you know, 40 times, it won't matter because they're not working with it. So you want to make sure that your message is also translating to the students, because the students are really the ones that are, and a lot of times students are absent-minded. So you got to make sure you find a way to get the information straight to the actual user or the generator.
Yeah, just, I guess also just don't forget that it's not just hazardous waste you do this with and non-hazardous waste, but you can do it with your trash, right? What's going into your regular municipal waste that doesn't go there, that can be recycled, and your medical waste, is a big costly one too. A lot of people throw stuff in there that don't belong there. So I'm talking, when you're doing this waste analysis, think about it at all the different stuff that's going on in your company, even your universal waste, right? Which I'm sure we didn't even touch in here, but that's another big waste of money, not filling the drums up and fully. And, I know our guys, they're just going to take them. It's just that they're not going to sit there and add all these extra things that are duct taped together and they don't fit into, the boxes properly.
And then finally, learn where your waste goes to. So that's super important because, for example, obviously, the farther your waste has to travel, the more it's going to cost in theory. It's not always true, I guess, but in theory. And so, if your waste goes to Canada, you might want to try to generate less of that waste, let's say. In theory, again, it doesn't always mean that it costs less, but so make sure you know where your waste goes and how it's treated, because for example, Mike, you can tell us maybe some numbers on this, the difference between halogenated solvents and the solvent waste and non-halogenated solvent waste. So
it's probably 3x,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you don't put that methylene chloride in that bottle. You want to separate that.
Lab pack it if you can, because it's actually cheaper to lab pack halogens than it is to bulk them. So a bulk 55 of halogens is so expensive.
Yeah, so you want to make sure you tell your researchers chloroform, methylene chloride, teach them that stuff, that hey, these have halogens, these are what halogens are. Put those in different containers, separate those out as much as possible.
So into small containers, yeah.
Small containers, yeah, so that you don't have, so that I don't.
Good point.
Right, fantastic. So before we get on to our Q&A here, I'm going to make a couple quick announcements. So we do have some webinars coming up, and as I'm talking about those, I'm going to launch a quick poll for everybody to fill out. So these are the EHS Community Connection webinars. We rely heavily on you, our community, to keep them going and to make sure we are giving you topics that you're interested in. We also rely very strongly on folks to volunteer to be panelists. A huge thank you to Mike and Jason for donating your time and expertise to making this discussion possible. I am very excited to dive into this Q&A and see all the questions that come up as we get more into these conversations. But it's just really nice to have these spaces to allow there to be some crisscross back chat between all the people in different roles and organizations. So let us know what topics you're interested in, whether you would like to be a panelist or if you know somebody in your network who would be a great fit. Those things are always really helpful for us. So I'll leave that up and let you know about some upcoming webinars. So in 2 weeks, we've got chemical inventory, fire codes, and you, talking about the intersection of chemical inventory and fire codes. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, I'm actually going to be taking some time off for the first time in the year. So we have Jonathan Klain on right now. He's our backup host in case anything terrible happens to my internet, and he's going to be your MC for that one. And he has lined up a really fantastic group of panelists. I think it's going to be an incredible discussion. So strongly recommend registering for that if you haven't yet. And then up after that, we have how to gracefully shut down a lab group, going through some of the technical elements and also the human elements of either temporarily or permanently closing down a group of scientists and the work they're doing. And then our newest one, applying behavioral science to scientific health and safety, is up. And we're going to have Sean Kaufman on for that one, talking about behavioral safety and all that great stuff. So looking forward to all of those. And without any further ado, we can move on to our Q&A. So a quick reminder, over in your Zoom webinar control panel, you have the Q&A button. It's two little chat bubbles. If you click on that, you'll be able to see all of the conversations that are happening now. You can respond to each other's questions. If you have follow-up questions, if you'd like more details, if you have an answer, it's great to have some chat and not just have the three of us really bottleneck information. So always great to see those things going on the side. And in the meantime, we are going to get started. So first question here is from Richard. Richard asks, what's the best way to handle unknown waste? Determining if it's toxic is a big question. So Mike, do you want to start this one off? Oh, looks like you're muted there.
Sorry, someone bugged me. So I can definitely handle that one. So there's no such thing as unknown waste.
Fact.
There we go. Done. No, I'm joking. But if you do get it, I mean, you have smart people in your labs, I assume, right? Characterize it, backtrack it, find out what it is, where it came from. I tell you that I don't even need. We can do characterizations of it and dispose of it. You know, and it's honestly not too much extra money, but if you have a lot of them, it becomes a lot of labor, a lot of time. But a lot of times, if you can backtrack that back, and I know there's crazy, weird stories where, oh, they were here for 20 years and they just left and they just, whatever happened, right, happens. And then you're like, I don't know what that is. I get that. You're going to have those. And that's when you do have to bring someone in, or if you can develop a procedure with one of your scientists, you can kind of characterize it out for yourself. Is it corrosive? Is it flammable? You can even do a test to see if there's metals in it, right? And if it's big enough, you could send it up for analytical, or you could kind of give up and say, let's just let our vendor handle that too. But I don't know if that answers. Jason might have a better answer too.
Yeah, so I'll try to be as specific here. So for example, I think the other day, somebody found some eluting solution that they use for this radioactive lab, and you know, they send it out as waste. And I got it, and I was like, I've seen this before. I know I've seen this before. I can't remember where I've seen it before. And I woke up the next morning and I remembered, yeah, it's eluting solution. It had 0.01 molar HCl. It wasn't hazardous. It was under the threshold. And my point is, sometimes send a mass email to all the chemists in the department, and I bet somebody knows what it is. So that's one thing. The second thing is your inventory. So if you know what's in a lab, if you know what's supposed to be in a lab, then it only can be those things, right? So if you go to your inventory and you can work in that sense, and then just use basic chemical techniques. You know, don't forget to pH it. You know, for example, you know, you kind of know what chemicals are supposed to look like. You know, you kind of understand viscosity, you kind of understand color. You know, you can see all of those things, and that may be able to help you. So when I get waste in the waste room, a lot of times that are unknown, I do a lot of those things. I'm like, if it's, for example, if it's red and it's in the Williams lab, you know, the Williams lab might only have 3 things in there that are red. You know, let's say ferric chloride or something. And it might not just be ferric chloride, but at least I know one of the things that could be in there. So your inventory is definitely one thing that you should definitely rely on. Past knowledge, that's another thing. And just basic, you know, there's also, I don't know how many chemists are on here, but you can characterize chemicals by, there are lots of tests you can do for functional groups, for example, so you can tell whether, you know, something has an acid group on it or something, and that might help you as well. So do all of those. And if all fails, I mean, you could send that out to get analyzed as well. Depending on what it is, you may be able to send it out to get analyzed. That might save you a lot of money as well in the long, down the line. So if it's a lot of it, you should probably try to get it analyzed.
So
Especially
gonna move on from this one just because you got
sorry.
No problem. Lot to talk about, and this is actually still going to be available to discuss. So we've got that over in the answered tab now. So if you guys still want to go on, talk about that. It looks like Rosalia has made a comment about a kit used to identify hazardous waste, and then some other suggestion from David as well. So really great to see everybody chipping in there to help out. Next question is from Kathleen asking, I'm interested to hear the panelists' general thoughts on trace waste. So no P code, but maybe it has an odor or residue. Do you typically store and send those as non-RCRA as opposed to municipal trash? How do you navigate the waste that might send a flag to municipal waste handlers that are in fact not hazardous? Maybe I overthink these things, but I don't know, something tells me you are well in the comfort of a group of people who are all overthinkers. And I can definitely repeat that if there's anything.
It's a great question. It's it definitely obviously depends on what it smells like, for example. But you know, I want to err on the side of safety when it comes to stuff like that. There's really no great answer to that. It's just because it depends on exactly what it is. If you got some, let's say, some Dry-Rite, that's probably a good example, and it smells of, you know, whatever was in it. If you're bulking your waste and you had some space in your drums, why not add it to it if you have space in your drums? So it wouldn't actually cost you, you know, anymore. So that's one thing you could do with stuff like that. That's why I'm a big proponent of bulking chemicals. So
yeah, and you can also, I mean, if you have lab packs, it can go with almost any other lab pack too, just because it smells, right? Because I agree, if you throw it in the dumpster and it breaks, it's going to stink out your facility. The dump smells anyway, right? They probably won't notice, but again, it's probably liquid if it smells too. Most of the time. So you're going to run into, you really shouldn't be putting liquid in the dumpster there, right? And the other, you know, there's other options. I think the problem is exactly what Jay says. You have to work with your vendor and ask them if there's other things you can do with it. And be honest, is there something I can throw in the garbage, right? Is there another way to get rid of it?
maybe you can put it in your, maybe you can put it in your none-has lab pack drum.
Yeah, exactly.
Marcus also adds that generator knowledge is key here. So if you know the maximum concentration of the hazardous components, it opens up options for selecting the most appropriate waste profile or allow decisions about sanitary or municipal waste disposal. And I think that also, depending on where the waste is coming from, gets to Jason's earlier point about know your chemical inventory. If you have that foundational knowledge about what could be in there, it's going to narrow down a lot of what you have to discover in order to make those kinds of downstream decisions. Great. Next up, we have a question from Carmen asking who actually does the waste profile. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier.
That can be quick. And
yeah, Mike, go ahead.
It's ultimately you as the generator are responsible for doing the profile. And I think some vendors will make you do it, and a lot of them will do it for you, but you're responsible for it. So I'm not going to pick on people that don't do them for the vendors out there, but you probably know if your vendor makes you do it or not do it, but I know that a lot of them out there will do it for you and will help you and not charge you for it. But it's just a pretty short, simple answer. It's ultimately you're responsible for it, but there's plenty of people that will help you.
Great. Next question here we have from Matt asking, you mentioned fuel blending. What is the cause of the backlog on TSDF end? I
don't know if Jason knows that one, so I'll answer that for you. So last year, a facility called Giant in South Carolina actually got hacked by the Russians, shut down their whole facility. And I really think that started the trigger because they stopped accepting waste. So it started going to the other fuel blenders all throughout the country. And then from there, you know, there was a serious increase in volume in the industry as well. So there's just not enough capacity right now with end disposal facilities, and they're overwhelmed, and it's with containerized waste. So that's where I saw most of the audience here all has containerized waste. If you're shipping bulk tankers, it's not a problem. They can handle it quick. It's handling these containers is so hard, and it's a lot of work. So it's backing them up. I don't know, that's the best answer I can give you is a little bit of everything, increased waste volume, as well as a hack that the Russians did.
Okay. And Marcus adds that he's heard that there's been a lot of cleanup activity during COVID downtime as well. So in addition to those backlog and the sort of worry up on the disposer end, you also just have maybe more things going out as people are trying to get ahead and do some spring cleaning.
Hand sanitizer is
getting
disposed of a lot right now because it's all expiring. Nobody needs it anymore, and it's they can't use it. But I've seen a lot of that, and believe it or not, there was a lot of hand sanitizer that got rejected because people didn't make it properly, and it was methanol and not alcohol.
Great. So moving on to the next one here from Marcy asking any general advice for a VSQG in an area with limited recycling options. And if I'm remembering correctly, Marcy, you are at Anchorage. I'm not positive about that one, but I think yeah, anywhere where you feel like, oh man, not as many options as maybe somebody who's located in Cambridge or Somerville, Massachusetts.
Oh, I'm not sure. That's a tough one. That's a good question. I'm not sure I can give you a great answer on that one, because no, you can't really transport it because you still have to follow the Department of Transportation regulations. So
this is great. No, I love this part because
but you can hold on to it for a long time being a VSQG, you know, so that's a benefit. You just can't go over whatever weight limit is in your state. That's the only advice I could give you. Save it up until you're not at the weight limit and then get rid of it.
And also, this is an opportunity for all of our attendees to go in and answer. You know, if you have experience on this, if you've heard of a good solution, if you're somebody in a similar situation, go ahead and jump over to our Q&A and let Marcy know what you're doing. And again, great way to help spread the information out here. And it's not just about having us be up here giving all this information to you, but really a place to have a group conversation about this topic. Next question from Mick is asking, I was once told by a specialty waste vendor that all waste could basically be put into 5 waste streams. I disagree with this point, especially when it comes to keeping costs down and preventing an untreated constituent. What are your thoughts on this statement? Do you agree? Do you disagree? So is that 5 waste stream something that you've heard before? Maybe news to both of you?
Definitely news to me.
News to me.
Yeah, I could see where, I mean, depending on your facility, of course, where a lot of it could fit into 5 waste streams, I guess. But I mean, that's nothing that I'm willing to say yes to.
Yeah, we would need a lot more specifics on exactly what your layout was for waste streams. I mean, because there are places that they only generate 1 waste stream.
Exactly.
And 2 waste streams or 3, you know, it's real specific, but we'd need a lot more detail, I guess, to out that. But generally, no, there's lots of categories.
Great. Next question here is coming from Marcus, asking, aside from checking the compliance box, can the return on investment be quantified per hour of training to the generators in laboratories? When are their diminishing returns when training is increased? Is that a...
Yeah, I think when it's not individual training, then that's when the diminishing returns starts happening. So you should probably give a general training, obviously, because, well, they're going to need it for record training anyways. So give a general training, but after that, it's really, really individual. When it comes to waste streams, it's really individual because every lab is doing something different. Well, in general anyways. And so if you're not doing individual training and you just keep piling on these mass emails or these mass trainings, the law of diminishing returns definitely kicks in after about an hour.
Agree. And another crazy thought is, you know, spending a little more money might save you money. So think of the spending the extra labor to get in there, and maybe you need to lean on your hazardous waste vendor to, when they're there for the pickups, maybe they go around and coach the lab up a little bit, right? And it's an extra 3-4 hours, so it's a couple $100, but it saves you thousands, right? So don't think of it as like maybe if you don't have the experience, lean on someone, but you should get a return out of that one-on-one. Yeah. You should definitely get a return.
Yeah. So I'd go to different labs and I'd go to their, we'd go through their protocols, and for each protocol, we have a training on what to do with, those waste streams. And so they write that down. And the good thing is that you don't have to retrain because they write it down. And so for the next year, it'll still be there for the new employees and so on and so on. So, yeah.
And then one other thought there as well is when it gets to the point where, this theme coming up of individual trainings are just more effective and give you a better ROI on increasing your savings on hazardous waste, that also does really increase your time. So being strategic about it, maybe finding your champions, the people who are respected in a lab group or in a group of scientists and people who are generating waste, where you can help them, really tell them a good story about how they're helping you, they're helping the environment, they're saving the organization money, and then leaving them to help coach the other people in the group with some easy takeaways can increase your impact without necessarily increasing your time commitment. And just as a quick aside here to jump in, we are all of a sudden at 4 p.m. Eastern here. The time has just really flown by. And I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity to jump off. We do have enough questions here that we can continue for another 15 minutes answering them. But of course, if you have other responsibilities, anything's come up, please feel free to get going. And a huge thank you to everybody for attending and engaging with us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Great. So
I have an extra 15 minutes. That's fine.
Yep, me too.
Whatever anybody wants for questions.
Great. And a big thank you also to Becky for jumping in and providing an answer option for Marcy's question earlier on VSQGs. Really love to see that. So next question here is from Kirk asking my county. Okay, great. Make sure I'm not getting that word wrong. My county allows VSQ generators to take wastes to the household hazardous waste collection days. What can I transport without needing a HazWOPER training, placards, etc.?
I don't think he meant HazWOPER placards, but yeah. So you can, from what I know anyways, you can correct me, Mike, but so you can use the material of trade. You could use the material of trade exception. And so that would give you, I think, if don't quote me, you can look it up, but it's like 66 pounds. It's like 66 pounds per container. Obviously
depends on what it is.
Of course, it depends. It depends on what.
It's right in the DOT.
Look it up, but that's the answer. Material of trade.
yeah. You could do it under, and you probably are under that, right? Because you know, as just think of like HVAC companies are carrying around, you know, gas bottles, and there's construction companies that are bringing around their little 5-gallon containers of gas or whatever it is. All quantities are listed in there for whatever chemicals you're looking for. I don't know them off the top of my head. It's not something.
Material of trade exception. That's the answer.
All right, fantastic. Just looking through here. And of course, if you guys, either of you see a question in the Q&A that you'd particularly like to answer, feel free to call that out. Great. So I have a question here from Lori asking, have the panelists seen a shift in, oh gosh, that moved, in end users' thoughts and perceptions on hazardous waste? For example, reluctance on drain disposal of chemicals that are permitted for drain disposal, i.e. not hazardous, and valuing corporate citizenship and environmental sustainability over costs.
I can take that one because I'm lucky enough to work at an institution that isn't poorest on planet Earth, let's say, to put it. And so we actually have a policy where we don't pour anything down the drain except for soap and water. For the very same reason, because we hold ourselves, you know, at a higher standard as far as making sure that we're not adding anything to the environment that doesn't need to be there. And so yeah, we all of that stuff goes out as waste. The reason why it doesn't cost me that much money is because I'm bulking stuff, and I almost always have a few gallons in my drums left over. So if I had to add some you know, non-hazardous chemical, it won't really cost me any more money. So I get away with. So for example, our soaps, some of our soaps, really concentrated soaps. If you look those up, some of them aren't hazardous, for example, but they probably shouldn't go down a drain, even though they're so not at that concentration. And so I'd bulk some of those. But yeah, so if you profile your waste, then if you have some more space in your drums, that's a really easy way to do it. No money, but you're not messing up the environment.
Yeah, definitely. And you can do elemental utilization in a lot of states too. So if you're comfortable with it, you can actually take your acids and bases that are inorganic and use them to balance each other out and make it water. You could put it down the drain because it is water at that point, right? And I know you guys all have chemists in your organizations that can help you figure that out too. I wouldn't be great at that. I'll just be honest.
And then, as somebody mentioned earlier, use your household hazardous waste disposal through your county. There's that might be free or close to free. So that's another good thing.
It could be, but it's a good thing if your company's supporting the sustainability movement to spend a little bit more money to do things what they feel is the right thing. That's great. If they're not, hey, You know, I see it all the time. Whatever my beliefs are, it doesn't matter. It's what the company that I work for wants to do, or the client that I work for.
Yeah.
You try and fit in that mold,
Yeah.
whatever their expectations are.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Next question here, scrolling down a little bit, coming from Rose, asking, the panelists agree that the written planning of procedures from beginning to end would cut hazardous waste costs. So how do you find the time and manpower, especially in a research environment or university, or really, I guess, in that case, any other VSQG or place where your resources are limited and you have a small team that may be very busy, where available EHS staff members reviewing those procedures are limited?
Yeah. That's
just to make something clear, that part about the VSQGs and other small groups was something I added. Rose's question was specifically about universities and research environments.
Yeah, that can be difficult. And Mike has touched on this quite a bit. I like to work backwards in the sense that I like to have the waste in my hand and then work backwards from there. So then I can go to the professor. And I think that's easier than, so don't waste your time making, I mean, unless you have to do it for regulation, but don't waste your time making big, mass emails and trainings and stuff that you don't need to do. Sometimes having a conversation, it can be 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to take that much time, or sending a quick email to a lab group that might not take that much time either. It's a really difficult question to answer, of course, but I think pretty much if you have the waste and you can just say, hey, just so you guys know, this has heavy metal in it, let's not, mix it with something else. And the reason is this. So, and then the thing is that they can pass that on to the rest of the lab groups over the next years.
Just one step at a time, start with the biggest producer or start with the smallest producer and do the test run. And yeah, you know what, if you chip off on it a little by little, you can do it. Or you make the case to the people that are approving the budgets that, hey, if you give me a little bit more money, I can go out and spend $5,000 to save us over the next 10 years, 20,000, 50,000. You can kind of calculate it out. And is $5,000 worth saving you 20? I think it is, but maybe it's not to some institutions.
Yeah, those ROI calculations can just do so much to unlock resources that you might have thought weren't available, to just be able to communicate that and say, hey, I'm just recommending that this is really the way to go. If we invest this little bit, if right now we are spending this much and we don't need to be, it's costing us these things. And also it's not just about, of course, the costs on paper, but also your time. If your time is particularly limited and you're spending a lot of your time to try and manage processes that could be more efficient, that can be hugely impactful. So those are good things to work into your ROI argument as well. And then also having that perspective of, I can't do everything, but I can do some things. Jason, like you mentioned, just being out and about and saying, I'm going to talk to somebody today. I'm going to try and start that good foundation. I'm going to identify my top 5 issues and then work from the top down and slowly get through that. It seems like a situation where every little bit helps.
Sorry, Mike, somebody's asking about, you said it doesn't clip earlier. I think you were talking about T-clip and they wanted to explain what clip meant.
Oh, yeah, TCLP. It's the metals under RCRA hazard waste, like the D4 for arsenic, barium, cadmium, chromium, lead.
It's a leachate characteristic leachate analysis. That was Jennifer asking that.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to everybody who jumped in and offered an answer there as well. Okay, let me just scroll up a little bit here. One question here from Matt asking, also, I'm interested in considering fuel blending, but the legal office has concerns about exposure to CER CLA. Not sure if that's one of those word acronyms or not. With the broad, I think maybe broadness of blending, I'm not sure what that word was supposed to be. Is this concern a bit unfounded, or have there been issues related to CER CLA that come back to institutions that do this?
I have not heard of any
Hmm.
fuel blending stuff that's come back to circular. And on my end, you know, maybe I missed something. I'm not in the lawyer's world, right? But I think sometimes it might just take some education amongst the risk management people, right? That they need to understand that it's perfectly fine. It's actually a good thing, because when you're fuel blending, it's not, it's getting used for energy, right? It's going to a cement kiln, it's getting used. They're permitted to do it. It's going to get burnt anyway. It's fully regulated. Like, they can't just do what they want with it. It can't go to my house and put in my boiler and me transfer my boiler to burn it, right? It has to be specific regulations. So I think it comes down to education.
Great. And next question here coming from Natalie, asking, I've had a hard time identifying companies that handle chemical waste. So do either of you two, in addition to all the folks who have chimed in with their own recommendations, have any thoughts or places for somebody to either look to find people or companies that you'd recommend?
It depends on where
are they?
Yeah, that's the question.
They could be in the middle of nowhere, right?
Oh, it looks like Indianapolis, and they're a small biology lab, mostly formaldehyde, PAB, and ethidium bromide waste.
Tradebi is out of East Chicago, Indiana. So there you go. That should be relatively close.
Yeah, they're pretty close.
Yeah, Tradebi is East Chicago, Indiana. So just a few hours.
There's others too. If you really want to email me, I can. Maybe you had a bad experience with them. And there's some others out there you could hit me up with if you want.
Tradebi, sorry. So Tradebi is Tradebe. So weird spelling. So I want to make sure Tradebe.
Great. And then it looks like there is a question here from Rose asking, does anybody have experience using this kit to characterize and identify hazardous waste? And it's a link to a website called hazcat.com. So if anybody has any experience with that one, feel free to chime into our Q&A, add your perspectives, and if that's something either of you have worked with, but otherwise we can move on here. Okay. Great. And then one final question here from Gina asking, where do you dispose of cell culture glass wastes? It looks like there's a mix between putting them in cleaning autoclaves and then also just disposing of them in the Sharps container.
Yeah, it depends.
It definitely depends.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's everything.
I can say that if there's no chemical in there, it's record empty. So unless they had something P-coated in there, it's record empty. So technically that can go in the trash. But autoclaving is a good shout, because then they'd for sure kill whatever was in it. It really depends.
Yeah, I mean, it does depend. Does it need to be decontaminated before, so you don't have to put it in the bio-waste box, or is it actually okay just go in the glass box and in the garbage, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that determination is key, and then you can kind of go from there. That Hazcat kit looks pretty good to me. Looks pretty cool on the visual. So I've never used it. We make our own kits internally, but it looks like something similar that we would do.
Right. Well, fantastic. That is, I think, basically everything here. We can do one final look at our prompt of the week, just kind of see what everybody's really looking forward to doing again now that everything is starting to reopen. And a huge thank you to Mike and Jason for your time today, for helping make this discussion possible, for answering so many questions. You two really did a marathon here, and I think we all really appreciate just helping to create the space again for all of this conversation to happen. So a big thank you to you for donating your time and energy. And I look forward to seeing everybody in, I guess, 4 weeks, but we'll see you all again in 2 weeks for our chemical inventory webinar that Jonathan will be hosting.
Thanks for inviting me, Matt, too. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a fantastic weekend and a long weekend for those of you in the US. And I will talk with you all soon.